Well, several weeks ago when he asked me to preach today, I looked at my calendar and saw that it was an open date. And I also saw that it was Thanksgiving Sunday. And so I decided to preach a sermon that had something to do with Thanksgiving. I chose Jesus' healing miracle in which he cured 10 lepers. And so I began my preparation. I've checked all of my commentaries and so forth, and I've thought and thought. Even going to bed, I thought and thought about it as I went off to sleep. And we were not here last Sunday because I was preaching for Everett Chapman at Fairfield Mountains Chapel. He and Jenny were away visiting family. And I didn't know until I got the messenger and read Preacher B's Beatitudes that Preacher B had preached on the very same passage that I've chosen today. So, I've got a couple of notebooks entitled Maxwell's Meanderings. And those notebooks contain some of the articles that I've written for the Tryon Daily Bulletin for the Faith and Worship page. And so I came across one entitled Thoughts on the Old Story, which was about Adam and Eve. And needing an illustration for God offering grace in the midst of judgment, I turned to Tony Campolo's book, Let Me Tell You a Story. And I followed it page after page after page and did not find anything that would fit into the sermon that I had prepared to preach about Adam and Eve. But what I did find was one that he had written and included in that book entitled Not Cured, Healed. And I thought to myself, that will fit into the sermon that I had originally planned to preach. It must have been a sign to me, because even though I had tried something else, I kept coming back to the very same thing. And I think that God works that way with us from time to time. And so I've chosen to go with that. Here's the story that I came across, and let me tell it in Tony's own words. A couple of years ago, I was at a church conference in South Africa. The other speaker was one of the founders of the movement, often referred to as the Toronto Blessing. This is a movement that very much believes in a theology of signs and wonders. Those engaged in this ministry contend that miracles are part of the witness we should have to an unbelieving world as we try to win people for Christ. This particular evangelist, he says, was very respectful of me, even though miracles were not any part of my ministry. When he asked if I was into healing people, I explained to him that when I'm with people who are sick, I always pray for them to be healed. But to be perfectly honest, I haven't ever seen anything spectacular happen. My friend jokingly reminded me that not seeing anything spectacular happen hadn't deterred me from being a preacher. We both laughed, even as he affirmed that the ministry of Christ was to preach, to teach, and to heal, and that all three of those things should be part of what we do in our everyday service for the kingdom. The next week, he says, I was back in the States and preaching at a church in Oregon. On impulse, as I ended the service, I said to the congregation that if anyone wanted to remain behind for healing, I'd be glad to pray for them. I told them they shouldn't expect much to happen because nothing much happens when I pray. But if they wanted to give it a try, I'd be willing to pray as hard as I could. Surprisingly, about 30 people stayed behind and waited patiently as I prayed for one after the other. Didn't want to do this healing thing fast like some of the healers I see on television. I really wanted to talk to a person before I prayed and get a feel for what was on that person's heart. I wanted to hug each person and connect with him or her as deeply as I knew how. I did that with each of the people who stayed behind, and in each case I put some olive oil that I brought along with me on their heads. It took me more than an hour to pray through that little group, but I did it. What intrigued me was that most of the people who'd come for healing had nothing physically wrong with them. One man needed healing for an addiction to pornography. One woman wanted healing for her marriage. Someone else asked for healing for anger. But there were a few who did have physical illnesses. 4 days later, I got a telephone call. And the woman at the other end said, "Tony, on Sunday you prayed for my husband. He had cancer." When I heard the word "had," my heart quickened a bit. "Had cancer?" I asked. The woman answered, "Well, he's dead now." When she said that, I thought to myself, a lot of good I do. Then the woman said, "You don't understand. When my husband and I walked into that church on Sunday, he was angry with God. He had cancer and he knew he was going to be dead soon, and he hated God for letting it happen. He wanted to see his grandchildren grow up more than anything. At night, he would lie in bed and curse God. It was horrible. And the angrier he got toward God, the meaner he was to everyone around him. It was unbearable just to be in the same room with him. His nastiness just kept getting worse and worse and worse. But then you laid your hands on him on Sunday morning and you prayed for him. When he walked out of church, I knew there was something different. I could feel it. He was a different person. The last 4 days of our lives have been the best 4 days we've ever had together. We talked and laughed. We even sang hymns with each other. It was a good time. She paused, then added something really profound. She said, "Tony, he wasn't cured, but he was healed." Well, you're familiar from having heard it last week that Jesus cured 10 lepers of their leprosy. 9 of the 10 were cured, not healed. Only one, the grateful Samaritan, was cured and he was healed. So, let's go for just a moment to what Jesus says to the one who's cured and healed. Luke chapter 17, verse 19. These are the words of Jesus. Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." Well, that's, I discovered, one of 3 possible readings of those words of Jesus, all of which are correct. First, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. That's the preferred reading I discovered from all of the versions of the Bible in my library that I consulted. Believing that they were told to go to the priest, and if they do go to the priest, they're told they'll be cured, and they go. And they go in the obedience of faith, and they are made well. All 10 are made well. The grateful and also the ingrates. So their faith, the faith of all 10, has made them well. Well, that leads me to thinking that there must be more to what Jesus says to this thankful Samaritan than just your faith has made you well. There is a second reading. Rise and go, your faith has saved you. Now, that word saved is the same Greek word often translated to save, and it's the normal word in the New Testament that we find for saving from sin, which suggests that the faith that this man had led him into the experience of salvation. The 9 also have faith. It's faith in the power of Jesus to heal, which is substantiated for them by the healing miracles that have taken place in Galilee. But that faith doesn't say anything distinctive about Jesus. It particularly doesn't say anything unique about Jesus. And so it's superficial faith. This man perceives that there's more to Jesus than meets the eye. He may not have a very developed understanding of who Jesus is, but he has enough insight into the person of Jesus to have saving faith. There's a third reading. Rise and go, your faith has made you whole. Only 2 of all of the versions of the Bible that I have in my personal library have that reading. Your faith has made you whole. One of them is the old King James Version of 1611, and the other is the old American Standard Version of 1901. So even though this is not the preferred reading, I like it better than the others. And here is why. Because I think that it conveys both. Your faith has made you well, and also your faith has saved you. He's cured, and he's healed. He's saved, and he's made well. To encapsulate it into one phrase, he's made whole. His healing is complete. Jesus has brought wholeness into his life. And so here, in conclusion, is the message from this miracle and the story Cured, Not Healed to me. Sometimes Jesus cures. Sometimes Jesus doesn't cure. But he always heals. And with the healing, whatever else may remain, comes wholeness. And so the question that I pose, has Jesus brought wholeness into your life? If not, he can, and he will. And all that's required of you is that you ask him. Let's pray.